Medicine,
Law, friendship. This is Dr. Long and lawyer Nick. You're listening to the Medico-Legal Brief.
one doctor, one lawyer, and a whole lot of gray area. All right, welcome back everyone to another episode here at the Medico-Legal Brief. This is going to be one of the good topics that I feel like ties the legal and the medicals together. And that's the whole reason this podcast was created in the first place. So I'm really excited to kind of bring these stories and these ideas to this episode. So I've got a couple of vignettes for obviously the audience, but also for Nick to kind of pick out where he thinks legally, where everyone has their roles and rules and how we navigate through the system, through the health system with those rules in place. All right, you good, Nick? Can I start?
Yeah, you can start. For everybody listening in, I know we're going to be going through some hypos, and in the lawyer world, we call them hypotheticals. If you've ever been to law school, you've heard of them. But just remember, this is not medical advice or legal advice. This is just the two of us trying to work our way through some examples and see if we can find those crossroads between law and medicine.
Exactly. And yeah, and of course, medicine and law is practiced differently in every state. So what may work for New York may not work for Texas or may not work for Wisconsin or, Nevada. So always look back at your state laws and rules.
Exactly.
So the first vignette I have is we're going to talk about patients leaving the hospital when the doctor doesn't recommend it. So the way we legally term that is a patient leaving against medical advice or leaving AMA. So this first patient I have is going to be about a 55-year-old of let's make it a female alcoholic with cirrhosis. So chronic cirrhosis, chronic hypertension, and uncontrolled diabetes. So she comes in obtunded, meaning she's completely out of it, not responding to any stimuli. Everyone's trying to get her to wake up and she's just not following commands. So of course, no one's able to reach her. No one's able to truly get a history. They don't know what her name is. She doesn't have her license or her wallet with her, but then she's able to wake up after 48 hours later. And at that point, she wants to leave. So the doctor says, treatment isn't done yet. We've only just started. We're not sure if it's safe for you to go quite yet. We're also still doing a further workup. Just because the patient came in, smells like alcohol, doesn't mean that was the sole reason or the sole purpose of why they weren't responding, right? There are a lot of other concerns that we want to make sure we rule out, like heart, lungs, brain. And so the workup was not done. But the patient refuses to give any names of friends or families that would help pick her up or that would come and safely take her home. So that gave the doctor or the physician another reason to give pause. So we weren't sure what other medications she's on at home, if she was taking any of them appropriately or not. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of this vignette. So what do you think, Nick, lawyer Nick, where would you say this patient has their autonomy? Like, are they, now that they are awake, responding appropriately, able to get up, move around, are they allowed to leave the hospital?
That's a great, and yet that kind of matches when you're in law school, that matches the hypotheticals that they throw on bar exam. The only difference is you're trying to figure out, in this instance, exactly what we're doing, what the legal ramifications are. I do have a few questions before I get into it, because
Yes.
obviously not a medical brain. I've
Yeah.
never done medical malpractice law. The extent of my medical capacity is talking to Dr. Long and going to go see my own physician. So for those at home, psoriasis, hypertension, what does that look like for an individual?
So first off, not psoriasis. Psoriasis is a dermatologic or a skin condition that is.
Okay.
We are talking about cirrhosis,
Cirrhosis,
which
okay.
is the end-stage liver disease after an assault, like long-term use of alcohol.
Okay.
Other things that can cause cirrhosis is fatty liver, overuse of Tylenol, other drugs, things like that can also cause cirrhosis or end-stage liver disease.
Gotcha. Okay.
Hypertension is high blood pressure, and then obviously diabetes is high blood sugars.
Okay. Now, my next question is, and this might be it depends from you, but how life-threatening are those issues? And life-threatening, I would assume, at least in the medical capacity, can be immediate or long-term, right? Something's going to cause you harm, it's just going to take a few years, or it's going to cause you harm immediately, like tomorrow. So
Right.
What does that look like?
That is a great question, because that is a question that as physicians, we have to run through our mind every single time a patient comes to see us, whether that's in the office, in the hospital, in the emergency room. What is their risk of leaving this room or leaving our care and then keeling over or having a heart attack or having a stroke? And so we're constantly running through those risk factors and those scenarios to make sure that we lower those risks as much as possible. So just a brief background on medical stuff. Things that increase your risk of heart attacks and strokes and death are one, alcoholism, obviously.
Yeah.
Alcoholism with cirrhosis is even more. High blood pressure that is not controlled, high diabetes that is not controlled, obesity, being male, smoking, cigarettes, those are all things that increase the risk of having a heart attack, a stroke, and dying suddenly. Okay. So in this particular patient, she has a lot of those
Hmm.
points already. And currently in this scenario where she's in the hospital, none of them are controlled. Blood pressure's up through the roof. Diabetes is not controlled. And then obviously she's drinking. She came in with an alcohol level of super high, off the charts.
Yeah. Well, to just kind of start, in this breakdown, one of the things from a legal perspective that's very important when you're doing a variety of different things is what we call capacity. Having the mental capacity, being competent enough to make a decision for yourself. In most states, there's like an age of quote unquote capacity where at the age of 18, you then have the mental competence to enter into contracts to seek out certain treatment. You're considered in most states an adult at that point where you can make decisions for your own and you don't have to have a guardian. And then you also go into the realm of capacity. Is your brain all there? Are you intoxicated, whether voluntarily intoxicated or involuntarily intoxicated?
Mhm.
And then, as you go on throughout life, you also hit the point where in older age, you might have dementia or Alzheimer's, which then takes away your capacity then. So I would say to start off, my first question when you look at an individual like this is, do they have the capacity to make their own decision? Are they competent enough? Are they aware enough to understand the ramifications of leaving against medical advice? And so from your perspective, what do you usually see in a case like this?
Yeah, so that competency will wax and wane, right?
Yeah.
For someone who has liver disease or liver cirrhosis, um, if their liver is not able to release those toxins will build up and they can become confused. They can act abnormally. Their personality may change. They may fall asleep and become uptunded or fall asleep and not wake up. So those are all kind of the different phases or scenarios that you can see in someone that has cirrhosis that is not taking their medications or continues to drink. So that's
Okay.
why we have to keep in the back of mind, yes, this patient is competent right now, but for how long?
And
And
see,
that's
go ahead.
where it's hard, right, for us to decide, do we allow the patient to leave or not?
And to that point, that's where I think the legal ramifications come in to where if you aren't releasing somebody who is competent, who is aware enough who has the capacity to make their own decision, then there's legal issues that can come play that way, right?
Right.
So I see two different issues that a doctor might face. If you are trying to hold somebody against their will, right? There's probably different layers, and I'm actually very interested to ask you how these things would occur. I did a little bit of research before coming on today, and I saw a thing called a medical hold, where you're holding somebody pretty much against their will, but you're stating they don't have the capacity or they're a threat to themselves or others, right? But let's say that you're trying to restrict the movement of another individual. Well, some people would call that kidnapping. Other people might call that assault and battery. You can have these issues to where, depending on what level of a hold, if you want to physically restrain a patient from leaving, you might be opening up a world of what we call torts or negligence, depending on how you do it. Now, there's the other aspect, and I think that this is from the medical side, where if you as a doctor, as a physician, as a team decide to let someone go, are you now liable? Are you now putting yourself at the helm of possibly being sued in the future because of what happens after they leave the hospital? Those are two distinct things I think are problems that a physician can face if you're not making the right call.
And that call is so hard to make though, because in a situation like this, you're kind of stuck in between two hard
Mhm.
places, right? You a rock and a hard place. But if you let the patient go, there's obviously going to be a risk that this is going to reoccur. They may pass out while they're driving and cause a car accident. So, or two, you keep them here and they may end up still having a seizure. So there's just, no matter what you do, there's going to be risks. But
Yeah.
the ultimate goal for a physician, what we have taken an oath for, is to do no harm. So we always will
Yes.
try to take the road that will lead to the least amount of harm, even though the patient is in a situation where they're probably going to have harm one way or the other.
Mhm.
So they may not be happy about getting stuck in the hospital against their will, but sometimes we may have to do, like you said, a medical hold. So there are different scenarios that can come up when their competency waxes and wanes. Sometimes we can have a second physician come, and if they agree that that competency can change over time quickly, then we can have two physicians agree that maybe this person is not safe to make decisions at this time. Another way is if a patient comes in psychiatric distress, right? So they've come in depressed, anxious, they've tried to commit suicide. Those are an automatic medical hold, and we can utilize that to our benefit by saying, okay, because they cut themselves or because they took this many pills, we have to hold them for 48 to 72 hours to make sure that we medically clear them before they're allowed to leave. So no matter what the patient wants to do, they're stuck. Even if they are competent again at that point and they are to their right mind, but the fact that they had already put themselves in the situation that did cause harm, we now, and most states will allow that. We now have this window where we can at least medically stabilize before we send them home or send them over to the psychiatric inpatient unit.
So that leads me to a question for you.
Yeah.
I completely understand putting a medical hold on paper, right? You're filling out the paperwork, you're making sure that you're tracking accordingly and you're writing all the details of it. How do you physically do a medical hold, from the point of, I guess, a physical restraint of an individual?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to do that as well. We try to do the least invasive. So one, just having a one-to-one is what we call it. So either a staff member that is available, they can sit in the room with the patient and just sit there and converse with them, keep them occupied, have a conversation throughout the day, and just calm them down as much as they can. So that is the simplest, but not the easiest to find, because obviously we in the medical field, we are very short on staff. So
Yeah.
to lose a member of the team to just sit with a patient is really tough to do. Second would be physical restraints, right? So we can put not handcuffs, but they are these like soft restraints that get tied to their hands and feet and then onto the bed. We usually don't utilize this in someone that is competent, that is able to make decisions. It's really more for people who are already mentally not aware of what's going on, but they just can't physically calm down.
Yeah.
And then third is chemical restraints. So we can give them medication that will calm them down. And there's a lot of talking between the patient if they are able to converse, trying to convince them, hey, maybe you're just a little worked up. Maybe you're just a little stressed, anxious, and that's why you want to go home. Maybe we'll give you this to make you feel better. So doing what we can to make them feel safe in the hospital so that they in turn change their mind rather than us trying to fight them and keep them there, maybe convince them and show them maybe the hospital is the safest place. It's, a better place for you to be than to go home. And I would say 90% of the time we're able to get patients to do that. It's that small 5 to 10% that get really tough and hard to keep.
And at what point do you call in security or maybe even the
So you only
authorities?
really call in security if they get combative, right? If they are
Yeah.
throwing things at staff, they're swinging at staff, then you're getting security up there to monitor. If
Mhm.
they continue even with security there, then at that point, we're probably going to say, okay, this is at your own risk. Yes, you can leave AMA against medical advice, but
Yeah.
you are going to be signing this form that
Yeah.
says you understand what you're putting yourself into by leaving this hospital system right now when we're trying to take care of you. And that form does lay out the legal ramifications. Again, luckily, I've never had to deal with a patient suing because of them
Mhm.
signing that, but it lays out all those things that we just talked about and how it protects the hospital, protects the staff, the physicians for letting a patient go against the advice of the medical team.
And that's, I think, the perfect part of where capacity comes in, because if they do not have the capacity to sign that, there can be as much legal jargon on there as you want. They did not have the capacity to understand what they were reviewing.
Right.
And so I think that's where that fine line is, where as a physician, you have to make that determination. Like, do you have the capacity? Like, you, at that point, it is very much your career in your hands, because if you determine that they did have the capacity, and all of a sudden you get a very, very good seasoned medical malpractice attorney who can point out all the reasons why they did not have the capacity. That's on you. And
Right.
before you know it, you're in litigation.
Right. And we get taught a little bit of this, probably should get taught more of it, but the goal or the reason for you to sit down with this document with patient is to one, run through the document, run through the different scenarios, tell them the risk, and then you have them repeat it back to you. So if they are able to repeat, okay, yes, I know I could possibly have a stroke when I leave the hospital or step out of the hospital here and get hit by a car. I know that those are risk factors and I'm willing to take it. Like if they can say that and respond to you and repeat, kind of summarize the conversation you had, then yeah, they're competent. Then there's they're gonna go. At
Yeah.
that point, it's really hard to try to keep someone, truly, truly keep someone when they don't want to be there.
Now, do social workers end up getting involved at all during this process?
Absolutely. Tons of people get involved, right? So when a patient leaves against medical advice, it doesn't mean we stop all care. We
Mhm.
still want to make sure that when we send them off, we send them off with something that is as safe as possible for the scenario that we're in. So we're going to try to send them medications if we need to. Or if they have a cut and it looks like it's going to get infected, we want to make sure that they can have access to their antibiotics. So we will send it to the pharmacy. We'll have the pharmacist come and talk to them to make sure they understand the side effects, the potential side effects. We'll have the social worker come by to say, hey, we think you have some alcohol abuse disorder that we want you to address. These are some of the community resources, going to AA, going to this rehab when you feel ready. Or these are the different medications that you can talk to your primary care physician about to get prescribed to get this treated. And just know that we are here to try to help, but because you don't want the help now, we're at least giving you the resources. So all these team members end up talking to the patient to make sure that they hear it multiple times, right? The more
Yeah.
times they hear it, sometimes it can actually convince them.
Yeah. And I think the unique thing about your hypo here is the fact that the individual has no family members that have shown up.
No family members that they are willing to tell to release.
Because I think that's also a dynamic, whenever I've gone in for procedures with anesthesia, it's always, hey, is somebody there with you to get
Mhm.
you home? Is somebody there to help take care of you? I mean, I feel like that's always been asked, even for, minor to major surgery. You're going to be out of commission for a few days. Do you have the individual that can change your bandages and make sure you're getting your pills and making sure that you're eating right and calling us if there's any issues? So
Mhm.
in this case, that individual, she's not giving you any of those other contacts to help out.
Right. And the hard part is we don't know if maybe that's a trigger for her. Like
Mhm.
is the reason she is drinking because of her family and friends or the lack of family and friends, We push for it just for legal reasons to make sure that we have someone on file, but we also understand that sometimes they can be triggers, and that's the reason why they're in the situation they're in.
Yeah.
So it's just so dynamic, and the scenario changes so often, and each patient is so different. It's hard, and that's why yes, the patients may be angry in that moment in time, but we try to give them grace and understand that they're just going through this blip in their timeline, that this is not the person that they are. It's just the person that they are right now at this
Yeah.
time and under this stress, anxiety, depression. And if we can pull them out of it, they are
Mhm.
most of the time a completely different person.
Yeah. Now, I think that based on what you've given me, if in your professional opinion, this individual was competent and had the mental capacity, even if you didn't want them to leave, I think legally you would have to allow them to leave. But
Correct.
you want to make sure that they sign all the AMA paperwork because
Right.
yeah, they have the capacity. I would say that it would vary a little bit if they woke up after an hour and they were intoxicated and they wanted
Right.
to leave. But
Correct.
here the example was 48 hours later. And unless you as the doctor saying that they are not going to be an immediate threat to themselves or others, I think you'd have to probably let them walk out the door.
Correct. Yep. And those are the things we would let them know. Like, hey, yeah, we'll let you leave. Maybe stay another 2 hours if we redraw some blood work because we're following certain numbers, right? We're following your sodium, which was a little low, more than it should be, or your kidney function because of you were dehydrated, or things like that. We can sometimes keep them a little bit longer so that we can at least add more little notes to our file because everything it gets documented. But say that, hey, we did our due diligence to try to make sure that when the patient left, even though it was against medical advice, that they were in the best condition they could be and the safest condition they
Yeah.
could be. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good
Yeah.
way to protect yourself.
Yeah. Awesome. You want to hear my second scenario for you?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Second scenario, a little different, but kind of the same, but a little different, a little bit more um, intricate and a little bit more complicated.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So we have a 95-year-old male patient with dementia this time. Okay. So he's coming in because he's had multiple falls. He lives at home by himself, but he has lots of family members. He has a couple daughters, a couple sons that come to visit him every other day, every week. So there's always someone around. Well, had multiple falls and he couldn't walk over the last 24 to 48 hours because he just had pain in his right hip as well as his right arm. So he comes into the emergency room. They basically scan him head to toe. No issues in the head. There's a fracture of the right femur or the right hip part, hip bone. No fractures in the arm at all. So otherwise, he's not on any medications, no high blood pressure, no diabetes, no anything. He's just on a multivitamin. However, his mentation while he's in the emergency room and while he's in the hospital bed, once he gets moved up into the hospital, waxes and wanes. So he sometimes part of the day he knows exactly who his nurse is and what they're giving him and why they're giving it to him. And then other parts of the day he has no idea where he's at. He's seeing things crawl up and down the walls, dogs coming in and barking at him. And sometimes he even gets combative. He even gets up out of bed and tries to swing at the nurses sometimes. Okay. But
I'm with you.
otherwise, super nice guy, obviously. 95, remember. He likes to tell stories. If anyone sits down with him, he'll talk about days back in the war, when his wife was still alive. Those are things that he likes to talk about. So for this situation, it's in the middle of the day, and he said he feels better. He feels like, hey, you know what? I was able to go to the bathroom, to the toilet with a little bit of help, but I was able to get there. Do we let him go or do we not? I intentionally left a couple of key pieces out. So obviously, I hope that you're going to ask. If not, I'll fill them in.
Yeah. Great example. And honestly, this one hits close to home because my grandfather, before he passed, was diagnosed with dementia. And so our family went through very similar things, not necessarily with him being hurt and injured, but with the cognitive function of where he was at. So for example, he was living in Colombia. My grandmother and my grandfather were divorced, and that side of the family's Colombian. And family members down there had mentioned that he wasn't himself, so actually went down to Colombia, brought him back to Texas, and had him live with her for a little bit. And thinking that everything was okay, she would go off and go to work for the day. She'd come back, and he's, lo and behold, not there. She finds him at a bank half a mile down the road, yelling at the tellers to give him his money because he thinks that he has money at this bank. So that was the first sign of, okay, he may not have the cognitive function to be by himself. He needs somebody there. To bring it back to this example, from my understanding, dementia is one of those issues where the cognitive function, the capacity, the mental capacity comes and goes. Sometimes they'll look at you and it's like they remember everything. Sometimes they look at you and they don't know who you are. And so having that cognitive ability or that capacity disappear is very concerning because, and correct me if I'm wrong, from my understanding, dementia doesn't go away. There's no cure for dementia, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's not like you can give them a pill and in a week they'll get better. It's like, if anything, it's only going to get worse as time keeps going on. So I think that some questions I have here is, first and foremost, are there any family members that are
Yes.
included in this situation? Because from experience, my mom and her sisters, as well as my grandmother, all had to be intimately involved with the next steps that were going to happen.
Yeah, so I kind of hinted that his wife already passed away a couple years ago, and he does have some daughters and sons that visit him often. However, there are two main people. One is the eldest daughter, and the second is the eldest son. And those two kind of are running the show at this point in time. Any sort of questions, they usually get asked. They're able to answer all the questions.
And so at that point, then we're looking at, again, legally, right? I would say that this individual probably doesn't have the capacity to make their own decisions. So my next question is, who has the power to make that decision? Generally with a power of attorney. So in certain instances, you could have a financial power of attorney who handles finances. You can have a medical power of attorney who handles medical, or I think that it's called a durable power of attorney with patient specific to dementia, Alzheimer's, where it's like you get to make all the decisions, right? And this stuff can go to one individual, it can go to different individuals. So I think the question there is there a power of attorney? Do either one of the family members have that ability to make that decision legally?
And we got lucky in this case, okay? So he did sit down with a lawyer. They do have their will, their power of attorney paperwork completed well before he ever was diagnosed with dementia. And so the primary power of attorney is actually the daughter.
Yeah.
Secondary power of attorney is the son.
And in that case, the daughter would have the ability to make the final decision.
Right.
Now, I guess legally speaking, and again, contracts and power of attorneys could be different, wills can be different. I don't know if in that specific power of attorney, there might be some language in there that says, as the daughter who is power of attorney, if I'm not in the room or if I'm not at the hospital, then the secondary power of attorney gets to make the decision, right? In that
Mhm.
case, as the son, all you gotta do is wait for the daughter to leave and then, hey, we're getting out of here. But there, that's why you write things up and you see a lawyer to make sure that everything's put in a place to where you can't have those loopholes. Like you don't want loopholes. You don't want, especially siblings rivaling against each other when their father's going through something as traumatic as this experience. So in this case, I think that the daughter definitely has the say. And, if her determination is that he stays and he gets the help, then that's probably what it is. Now, in a case where there's no power of attorney, I think at that point you might have to go into guardianship proceedings where the court
Mhm.
then has to appoint the guardian of the individual. And at that point, you're grabbing lawyers, you're grabbing attorneys, you're going before judges, you're trying to figure it out. And that can take a while. So while
Yeah.
that's going on, I would assume that you guys as physicians would have to make the determination as to whether or not to release the individual, even though you have all this extra noise being the siblings telling you what they want.
Yeah, yeah, and you got it right there. So if the power of attorney paperwork was not completed and we didn't have access to it or have it available, you're right. Guardianship is the next process, which usually, depending on state, depending on location, and depending on social worker, may take up to 4, 8 weeks to even
Wow.
get
Yeah.
through the proceedings. Yeah, so you're now going to have a patient that's going to stay with you until that happens because no decision can be made until that guardianship has been appointed. And then we're also talking about when they get discharged, we want to make sure they get discharged into a safe position, right? It's a safe place. And so you can't really obtain that until you have a guardian in place. And so again, I think this is also another shout out to patients out there who are in their 50s, 60s. It's a great time to get your paperwork in line with your family members. Make sure that everything is there. Make sure everyone has a copy of it. That way, that when you do hit 70, you do hit 80, that no one's scrambling around trying to find it, that it's available. It really helps not only the patient, you get your wishes followed through with, but it also allows the medical team to do what we do best, which is take care of you from a health wise.
Yeah.
Um, there was a couple of other things I think I wanted to mention that you had already mentioned that there are two types of power of attorney, right? One is financial and two is medical.
Mhm.
We in the medical field, we care nothing about the financial. We don't care if it's the same person that you appointed to be your medical and your financial, or if they're two completely different, because it has nothing to do with us and how we take care of you. We don't care if you have a lot of money or a little money. We just
Mhm.
care who is the one that you wanted to make the decisions for you. Other thing is when we have two POAs like this, where there's a primary and secondary, sometimes it comes up with another even more difficult scenario, right? So this is kind of another tag along to our scenario here. So yes, we know the primary is the daughter and the secondary is the son. However, daughter feels like, you know what? Patient can go home. I'm going to watch him. I'm going to take care of him. Son says, no, there's no way. He keeps falling at home. You have a job. You have to work. You can't be there with him 24/7. He should stay. And so now both kids are arguing with each other. Who do you follow? What do you do? What do you think we do?
That was actually going to be my question for you because from that standpoint, how can you verify if your job as a doctor is to make sure that the patient has a safe exit from the hospital or from the care center? How do you verify that where they're going is safe? That they're gonna get the attention, that daughter is gonna give him all of his pills and be there. Because to my example, the personal example is my grandmother worked, my mother worked, all the sisters worked. Ultimately, they made the determination to put him into a facility that
Mhm.
specialized in dementia patients. So how do you handle that if daughter says I can take care of him and son says no you can't for X, Y, and Z? And I think at that point that gets a little bit more murky. That's that
Complicated.
weird like legal and medical gray area
Yeah.
because legally the power of attorney, the primary, has the ability to make the decision. But as a physician, you're trying to make sure that your patient is safe. So I think legally I could argue for both those individuals as to why my say should matter. One is a document, like the contract, the power of attorney, the written document says I have the power. And then secondary, I could say, well, I can prove why you are not fit to take care of that individual. But then in the law, we have two things that we always bring up as answers. You can reach a decision, like reach an agreement, or go ask a judge. So if they're not going to reach an agreement, you got to go ask a judge to say who has the final determination.
Yeah.
But as a physician, what would you do in that situation?
Yeah, so we try to, again, we try to talk it out as much as we can. We
Yeah.
don't want to take anything to a lawyer. We don't want to take anything to a judge if we can avoid it. So we always try to throw out all the different scenarios, all the different options, as well as all the different resources. So for someone like this patient who has a hip fracture, and I didn't mention it, I was hoping you were going to ask, but there is not going to be any sort of surgical intervention because of his age, right? He's
Yeah.
too old. Surgeon, orthopedic surgeon says, you know, we're not going to do anything. So he can walk on it as he's able to. So we know that he's going to be pretty much chair bed bound because the pain's going to be excruciating.
Mhm.
He's going to get pain meds, but pain meds come with their own risk, set of risks. So whoever's going to give him those meds has to balance out the pain control with mind altering, sedation, confusion, things like that. But in this scenario, we would lay out options. He can go to rehab. He can go to rehab and then nursing home, or he can go to rehab and go home. If the social worker would literally call all of these facilities around the area, make sure that there are beds available, and then if the daughter is agreeable, we would then send approval, prior authorization through the insurance, make sure the insurance is going to cover the stay, and then if we get the okay from the insurance, we get the okay from the daughter, then the patient leaves the hospital and goes directly to that facility. So we try to set everything up as best as possible. And along with that, if the patient does go to a facility, we have to set up all the medications. So we have to send in all the prescriptions, any medications he was on prior, as well as any new medications he's getting. That will all get sent to the facility, and they will dispense all of that.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that he has an appointment to follow up with his primary care physician. So the doctor that is out in the community that he normally sees, make sure that they follow up in 5 to 14 days to make sure that everything is still going as planned and nothing has fallen through the cracks. We also need to make sure we set him up with physical therapy, occupational therapy, so things that will help strengthen him. So how often will that need to be done? Is it once a day? Is it 3 times a day? Is it just twice a week? Those are things that we have to coordinate. And so those are the options that we throw out there. And if the daughter is still at that point, she's like, you know what? I don't want to deal with any of that. I want to just take the patient home. Then unfortunately, sometimes what we have to do is we just document that and allow the patient to fail before the daughter can actually see that maybe she can't handle it. Sometimes that happens. Rarely does it happen, but it can happen because
Yeah.
usually we can convince them enough that, hey, insurance is going to pay for 4 weeks for your dad to be in this facility where another person who has medical training take care of him. Why wouldn't you let that happen? Usually they're like, okay, if it's free, we'll do it.
Yeah. So one thing that is kind of sad in the law is that generally when you're going to go see an attorney, yeah, there's some uh, preemptive, preventative stuff like doing a will, right? But generally, if you're going to go see an attorney, something bad has already happened, right? So the sad part about this example is if daughter wanted to take him home and daughter really didn't have the ability to take care of him and something ended up happening to the individual, and in this case he's 95 years old, one more fall could literally
Yeah.
kill him. Yeah.
Mhm.
Then there's liability on the daughter as the guardian, as the power of attorney, as the person who is taking on the duty of care for the individual. And at that point there might be some legal cause and legal ramification. Depending on how it goes, there may even be some criminal stuff in there depending on the route that she takes. But the sad thing is that stuff won't occur until after the horrible event eventually occurred. So that's one thing to keep in mind is power of attorney. Either way, whether it's medical or financial, you're making the decisions for another individual. And just because somebody, just because your mother or father asks you to take on that role, you don't have to take that on. You don't have to put your hand up and say, I'll be your power of attorney for either one of these things. But you always want to give it to somebody that you trust, that you feel like they would make the best decision for you if you can't make it for yourself.
And also make decisions in accordance to the way you would have made it if you were in
Yes.
the situation. Yeah. Not
Yes,
just
exactly.
the best way that they felt right, but the best way
Yep.
that the patient felt right. Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, that's kind of the sad part of the
Yeah.
example is if daughter doesn't want to take care. But then again, the son could always start legal proceedings and start an argument over guardianship. And you hope that in that point, you have a good team to where you have a good social worker, you have good people on the insurance side that are able to help the physicians and the nurses, that everybody's talking. I mean, the number one thing to like really help a lot of these situations is just open communication,
Right.
being able to communicate.
Correct.
Um, I really like the example. The example's a good one.
Yeah.
Anything else in that example that you think that we missed or we need to tinker out a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think we missed the whole how do you determine, just because he has dementia, how do we determine his power of attorney,
That's a good
right? Does
question.
that need to be activated? So similar to our alcoholism scenario beforehand, you still need two physicians to determine whether or not this patient is competent to make his own decisions. So for dementia, it's a little easier because there are certain tests out there, certain questionnaires that we can do to prove, or at least to grade how severe his dementia is. So things like the mini mental exam or the slums exam, those are all things that we utilize in the office as well as in the hospital. And they are just simple questions asking about short-term memory, long-term memory. Are they able to do a little bit of counting, math, spelling? Are they able to draw a clock, dexterity, things like that to kind of help us pinpoint all the different things where dementia can creep in to allow us to is it mild dementia, moderate dementia, or severe dementia. And then if both physicians are agreeable that he can't make the medical decisions, just because he can remember what he ate doesn't mean he can make decisions appropriately,
Yep.
then we can finally activate the power of attorney, the medical power of attorney. And that's when we then follow through with everything that we just talked about.
And for the power of attorney, do you guys need to see the legal paperwork? I'm assuming you need to actually see the legal paperwork that is signed by all parties.
Absolutely. Yep. It has to be signed by all parties and it has to be the original copy. And then we scan it into the chart. And that way it's always there. And then it gets highlighted anytime that the patient's seen in the facility.
Now, when you say original copy, is that something that's specific to your area, or is that something that's kind of a nationwide
I
standard?
think that's a pretty nationwide
Yeah.
because you want to make sure that there's not a falsified copy out
Mhm.
there. So usually you want an original. We always hand the original back as soon as we make copies, but we want to see the originals usually.
Yeah. And, I don't know how that goes from different states to states and jurisdictions, but when you're looking at some contractual stuff, sometimes a copy is good enough depending on where you live. Sometimes an original is needed and necessary. It just kind of depends, and that's where that question came from.
Got it.
Another follow-up question, I think that this is just from a societal standpoint. I think there's confusion, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? Because I feel
Yeah.
like they're two very distinct things, but people will use them synonymously.
No, because they are kind of synonymous, right? So
Mhm.
dementia, if you want to think about it, is the broad umbrella term. So dementia engulfs a whole bunch of different types of dementia. So you have dementia, which is the big umbrella, and then under that, there are different categories or different diseases that cause dementia, like Alzheimer's is one.
Okay.
Pick's disease is another. There's frontal temporal dementia. There's vascular dementia. There's all different sorts of dementias underneath the big umbrella, which is termed dementia. That's all.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
so
I did not know that.
that's why people and medical people sometimes interchange them too much and makes it confusing. But yeah, Alzheimer's is usually the classic, most common, most likely cause of dementia, which is just time and age. And as you get older, you just start losing some of those capacities.
Yeah.
Just a little a tidbit in there. Unfortunately, dementia cannot be reversed. However, it can be slowed down. Specifically, Alzheimer's can be slowed down. And the way to do that is to stay active as you can be, right? So patients who are still working tend to do better. Patients who have a really strong social network, they go out to eat every other day, they go play pool, whatever they do, bowling, they tend to do better. People who have a I don't want to say higher education, but people who have had a higher learning capacity. So if they like to read books, if they like to do word puzzles, crossword puzzles, those are things that will keep their brain going. So I try to explain to patients like your brain is a muscle. If you don't utilize it, you're going to lose the muscle. So if you don't utilize your brain and you're just sitting around on the couch watching TV, you're going to lose it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so for anyone out there with dementia or family members with dementia, those are things that you can do for your patients. There are some medications that are available to slow down as well. And you want to talk to your primary physician with that or your neurologist about those things. But again, I think the best way to do it is just keep your family member active and socially active as best as you can.
And I think that's just good habits for life. To stay
Exactly.
healthy, to stay fit, to keep your heart pumping. It's
Yeah.
stay active, keep doing things, and
Yeah.
that definitely helps.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to throw in there, back to the power of attorney, because I know that, after listening, some individuals might say, oh, I actually need to get on that. Like we talked about, you can make one individual all of it. Or in the case of maybe you don't want to show favoritism, you can give one, um, son a medical power of attorney, the other daughter financial power of attorney. You can find ways to make sure that you're not maybe upsetting your sons and daughters or your parents or your uncles and aunts, whoever you deem fit to be your power of attorney. There's ways to put things in. I know some people be like, I will never give, this individual any power of attorney. It's always going to be this one. But there are ways to divide it up and help the decision making process to where you're not necessarily showing favoritism, especially something as sensitive as that.
Right. I have a follow-up question about that topic. So,
Yeah.
for someone out there listening, how do you go about finding a good lawyer to get all this done? Like, do you just Google it? Do you have to know someone to know someone? Like, how do you find out who's a good lawyer? Or is it usually just word of mouth? Like, oh, my neighbor did it with this lawyer, so let's go with him.
So the first thing that I'll say is that I will always recommend that someone goes out and gets a lawyer, that you hire an attorney to do it the right way. There are many sites online where you can find documentation, especially when it comes to contracts. I think we talked about that before with like employer agreements and whatnot. You can pull a contract online and you can mess with it, and it could be a sound contract. You can put in some of your own language, you and another person can sign it, and that could be the agreement. I do know that some states will have certain items that need to be in a contract or need to be in a power of attorney or need to be in a will to make it sufficient per the law. Right. So if you're looking, the first thing that's always easy is checking with your network, checking with your friends, checking with your family. For my parents, they came to me and they said, hey, do you recommend anybody that can get our will done? And I said, hey, I might be a lawyer, but I don't trust myself to do your will. But one of my friends I trust very much, who went to law school with, that's what he specializes in. He served, in a capacity where he clerked for a judge who handles a lot of wills and estates. He got hired on by a big firm. I trust him. And they went to him and they sat down and had a consultation with him. And it ended up being that it worked out. Right. So then from there, they brought my grandma there along. I think I even,
Yep, I got.
it's the goodwill. And I think immediately when I get feedback, because I always ask for feedback, how was the experience? Right? If it's a good experience, then I will keep that reference point up. If it's a bad experience, then it's time to investigate why. So just like you would search for a doctor too, I would assume, you want to ask your network, your social network around you. Google is always good where you can go on, and the beauty about the internet these days is you can read the Yelp reviews and the Google reviews and the reviews left on the medical website or the legal website. Now, granted, you always want to take things with a grain of salt because sometimes the angriest people are the loudest people, and that may not be what is representative of that individual. But that's another way to do it. And like I say, use your client consultation. Go in and talk to the lawyer and see if they're a good fit for you. You're not forced to go with a lawyer. You can always walk away and find somebody else. So find somebody that you're going to trust and you're going to feel comfortable with, because if you don't trust your lawyer, just like if you don't trust your doctor, bad things can happen. What do they say? You don't lie to your doctor or your lawyer because you want to
Can't help you if I don't know the full picture. Right.
exactly. So that's the way I would go about it. Obviously you do a lot online. You can go to, you could look for lawyers in the system. A lot of local bar associations, like we have here, like there's a Texas Bar Association, there's a Bar Association of Fort Worth. These are associations in which lawyers will go and they'll volunteer or they'll put their name and their specialty in. You can always approach one of these associations and they will have a bunch of people that they can refer you out to as well. So that's what I'd recommend. And again, sometimes things are easy enough to do yourself, but other times you want the professional to do it. So you just have to make the decision that's best for yourself.
Yeah. And again, just to add on, states are different, right? So
Yeah.
I know that for specifically medical power of attorney in New Jersey, you actually don't need a lawyer. You just
Yeah.
have that conversation with your primary care physician, and you can change your mind every other week.
Yep.
and we just sign a new form, and it becomes the new rule. Whereas in states like Wisconsin or state of Texas, you do physically need to have a lawyer present to sign and make it legal and official. So
Yep.
yeah, just review again, make sure you go through your state rule book and legal jargon before you
Yep.
get that lawyer. But you'll again, lawyer would be able to tell you all those things anyways.
Yeah. And granted, I'm gonna with AI nowadays, like
Mhm.
you can put these questions into AI, and although I wouldn't necessarily always trust everything AI is spitting out, generally it'll have a hyperlink to the resources that have the jargon in there. So
Mhm.
you can go down the rabbit hole to make sure you're doing it appropriately. Because the worst thing that can happen is, I'm sure as a doctor, if you were in the room and the daughter says, "Hey, I have power of attorney," you say, show me the paperwork," and she shows you the paperwork and it's not what it needs to be, then it's chaos. It's pure chaos, and that's not something you want.
Right.
I think that was a great conversation. I think
Yeah.
we've talked about the podcast going multiple routes with trying to show what the day in the life is of a lawyer and a doctor, talking about how to take time off and how to get through law school, how to get through medical school. But I think that over the course of the podcast, these vignettes, these hypos will be some of my favorites because I think this challenges both of us to really think about from a professional standpoint, what are the true issues that you're facing here? So I
Exactly.
really appreciate you putting these together. I'm sure they're from personal experience.
Yeah, some, absolutely. But yeah, and of course, the audience listening out there, any topics or interesting vignettes that you want us to run through and have a conversation about, just let us know. Send us a message, an email, however you want to get in contact with us.
And again, not medical advice, not legal advice. If you need advice, please seek out your medical professional. Please seek out a lawyer and get some more details for your jurisdiction, your state. But yeah, thank you guys for listening. That's it for this episode of the Medical Legal Brief, where medicine meets law. If you like what you heard, share it, rate it, and give us a follow. As Long just mentioned, if you want us to talk about something next time, let us know. All right, so that's our time with Dr. Long and Laura Dick.
Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks. Yes, we're doctors. Yes, we're lawyers. No, this podcast is not medical or legal advice. Do not take anything we say as a reason to perform your own heart surgery, represent yourself in court, or diagnose your neighbor's rash. This is for entertainment only. Think of it like hanging out with your smartest, wittiest friends, not a substitute for an actual appointment. If you act on anything we say without talking to your own professional, that's on you. Seriously, don't do that.